Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. This video is going to be a wrap-up, I guess, of my Shaketember readings. Shaketember is an event hosted by Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, and Nicole from A Day of Small Things, inviting us to read Shakespeare, plays and poetry and books about Shakespeare in September. So I'm going to leave links to their channel in the description box below. So I read a couple of things related to Shakespeare for Shaketember. And then I'm going to give you a bit of an update on my situation, because a few weeks ago, you may remember I made a video from a hotel room, and I'm just going to give you an update on the situation. So let's start with the books. So Shaketember, each host chose a play, and I just read the first one that they chose, and that is Romeo and Juliet. It was my first time reading the play. I had never read it before. I have never seen it performed on stage. So for me, it was a premiere for me, a first time for me. That being said, I know the story very well because I've seen adaptations of it, whether in movies, in ballet, in music. The story of Romeo and Juliet is just so well known. So spoiler alert, I assume that you know how it ends. I assume that you know the characters. I assume that you know in general the story of Romeo and Juliet. So, how did I like the play? Not as much as I expected. I expected to like it a lot, and I just liked it okay. It reads well. It's not a plot particularly complicated to understand. Well, perhaps because we know it so well. So Romeo and Juliet come from families that hate one another and have been caught in a feud for generations. Nobody knows exactly what is the origin of the feud, or perhaps it's just not told in the play at the very least. And yeah, there's constant conflict between the families, and yet Romeo and Juliet, they see one another one time and they are desperately in love with one another, and that's going to lead to tragedy. So the thing that did not quite suit me in that play is that until the very last scene of the very last act, this could have been a comedy. If you think it, even though there's a lot of short foreshadowing of that, we know that Romeo and Juliet are going to die, even despite the foreshadowing, the construction, the way it is made, this last scene is the one that turns it into a tragedy. So this last scene, so there has been in the scene previously the funeral of Juliet. She is faking her death, and that's supposed to free her and allow her to go join Romeo, who has been exiled. So it's supposed to be her liberation in a way. But what happens is that Romeo is not informed that Juliet is just faking her death. He thinks that she is really dead. So he rushes back to Verona. He goes to the cemetery, and he is determined to kill himself. But before he does that, he kills someone else. He kills Paris, who was somewhat the official fiance of Juliet, and who came to pray at her tomb. And Romeo sort of confronts Paris. Now imagine at that moment, Romeo confronts Paris in front of, beside Juliet's tomb. What if Juliet comes out of the tomb? She's alive, she's well, she explains the situation. Romeo and Juliet find one another, they escape. The end. All is well that ends well. That could have been the title of the play. But no, what happens is that Romeo kills Paris, and then he kills himself, and then Juliet wakes up and sees Romeo dead, so she kills herself. So that's the tragedy. That's the three deaths at the very end of the play that make this a tragedy. Just change a few lines, just a very, very few lines, a handful of lines, and this could have been a comedy. So that's the thing that bothers me. It could have been a comedy. And anyway, another thing that bothered me a bit is Friar Lawrence. He's supposed to be the incarnation of wisdom, and yet he behaves very wrongly. When he marries Romeo and Juliet in secret, he should not be doing this in secret. Well, perhaps he could do it in secret. Okay, they're married in secret. And then he should have accompanied Romeo and Juliet to their respective parents and bring the couple and present the couple and say, Mr. and Mrs. Capulet, I have married your daughter to Romeo, and it's now time to end the feud. And then take them, Romeo and Juliet, go to Mr. and Mrs. Montague, I have married your son to Juliet. It's time to end the feud. And all is well that ends well. You wouldn't have had any story, but it's a bit like in these young adult books when the the children have or the teenagers are given responsibilities beyond their age, and then the adults do not act responsibly. If the adults acted responsibly, there would be no young adult book. And we have this in this situation. If Friar Lawrence had done the right thing, we would not have had a tragedy. So Friar Lawrence annoys me a little bit too. Even though in Prokofiev's version of the ballet, Friar Lawrence has a beautiful melody played on the bassoon. I did not like the character of Friar Lawrence in the play, and I did not like the ending. I thought it, I don't know, can I really say it was badly brought up? No, it's not that it was badly brought up, but it was rushed. I guess that's what it is. It is rushed. The tragedy is 3 deaths at the end, and there's just a few lines to digest them, and that's it. It's over, curtain, and that's that. So I liked it, but it's not going to be my favorite Shakespeare play. And then I read a book about death in Shakespeare. I think I've talked about it in a previous video. This is Death by Shakespeare, Snake Bites, Stabbings, and Broken Hearts by Kathryn Harkup. So the author decides to examine how the Shakespeare characters die and how that reflects reality, and the reverse, how people died at the time of Shakespeare, how that is reflected in Shakespeare plays. So the moral of the story is, the conclusion is that Shakespeare is somewhat realistic in the way that he portrays death. Some of them, of course, are more common in Shakespeare than in real life, such as people being stabbed. A lot of people get stabbed in Shakespeare, perhaps not that many in real life. And in real life, many women died of childbirth, and in Shakespeare, it's really not that common. In fact, I don't think it happens on stage, it just happens off stage. Or it's mentioned that such character died in childbirth, so it's not something that we necessarily see. But anyway, it was really very interesting, and despite the grim topic, the author made it a bit light. She has a good sense of humor, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So talking about poisoning, which perhaps was more common in Shakespeare than in real life. Using toxic substances to murder in a play has certain dramatic and practical advantages. There is no need for blood and gore to be used, which is always messy and a nightmare for the laundress to get out of the costumes. Actors also get to make the most of their death scene with choking, maybe some twitching or even convulsions. Such displays might not always have been scientifically accurate, but it is convenient shorthand to let an audience know that a character has been poisoned. So that's, I thought that was fun. And this one about the death of Henry VI. Henry VI died, if not immediately, then not long after the Battle of Tewkesbury. The official account was that he died of, quote, pure displeasure and melancholy, end quote, on hearing that his son had been killed in battle. But it was a particularly violent kind of melancholy brought on by the rapid application of blade against flesh, a detail left out at the time. So all of this to say that Henry VI was murdered. So yes, it's a particularly violent kind of melancholy, being murdered. So there's a lot of little sentences like that that make the book very light, well, not so much light, but fun to read and interesting. So if you like Shakespeare, you're going to like this book. And then I tried to read this. This is Julius Caesar, not by Harold Bloom, but by Shakespeare. So you have to read the small print, not the big print at the top. So it's the introduction that is by Harold Bloom. It's about 15 pages, and the rest obviously is Shakespeare. However, I did not make it beyond the first few pages of Act 2. So I'm still in Act 2, Scene 1. Because that is where my issues happened. On September 13th, I woke up and I was hearing some sort of a noise, and I thought, oh, who leaves the air conditioning in the middle of September that loud? This is ridiculous. And then I sort of realized, wait, it's coming from inside. What is that? And I got out of bed, and my 2 feet were in the water. So it was a pipe behind the washing machine that decided to give up on life during the night. And I assume like 15 minutes after I went to bed, because there was so much water. It had been leaking it's more than leaking. It had been really flowing for quite a while. So yeah, there was a lot of water, and I had to call the insurance. I called the condo management company too. They sent help. They sent people with fans and trying to dry things out, and the fans stayed on for 3 to 5 days. And then my insurance company sent another person who said, yeah, the floors will need to be ripped. And then I waited a couple of days, and the person did not show up. So I decided to remove the flooring because I did not want mold underneath. So I removed the flooring, I did that. And throughout that time, I couldn't really read because I was just too preoccupied by the situation, waiting for phone calls, waiting for emails, waiting for people to come. There were the fans that were making a lot of noise. There were 10 powerful fans trying to dry the floor. It was really a time that I could not read. I could read a little bit of something. The only thing I could read at the very beginning, I sort of, the fans were there and I just had to wait for 3 days for things to dry. They said 3 days, it ended up being 2 weeks. Anyway, at first I sort of escaped by reading books. I read romances. Oh, I forgot. The reason I have these romances, it's still Shakespeare related. So I have a challenge for you. The reason there are bookmarks in these romances. This one on page 15. This is Not That Duke by Eloisa James. On page 15. Benedict, in Much Ado About Nothing, Stella said, "The world must be peopled. When I said I would die a bachelor, I did not think I should live till I were married." So Shakespeare is quoted in this one. In this one, Shakespeare is indirectly quoted because our hero has learned that it was okay to swear, but only if he used swear words or insults used by Shakespeare. So he's a Shakespeare fan, and he brings his sweetheart to a play, and they have to leave in the middle. But the sweetheart is not very educated, so she doesn't really know about Shakespeare. So what happens at the end of the play? I want to know what happens. He answers, "The nurse is stabbed, Lucius is stabbed, Bassianus is stabbed, Saturninus is stabbed, Marcius and Quintus are beheaded, Tamora dies of a stomach ailment, the cause of which you really don't want to know, and Aaron is buried to his neck and left to starve." She turned to him in disbelief. "Why would you spoil the ending?" He answers, "I didn't spoil it. It's a Shakespearean tragedy. They're all that way. Everyone dies. The end." So I thought that was a bit funny, quite funny. And anyway, the challenge is take notice. So perhaps take a notebook, a piece of paper, and write down how many times Shakespeare is either directly quoted or referenced very precisely in a book that has nothing to do with Shakespeare. In a romance novel, a mystery, in regular general literature book, in a non-fiction that has nothing to do with Shakespeare, how often does the name or his place come up directly, like direct reference? And I guess that's rather often. So I'm going to do that for the next year. I'm going to try to remember it, but I'm going to make a page. I'm going to make a page for it in my reading notebook. And I'm going to try to write down the title and the page in the excerpt and just take notes of every time Shakespeare gets mentioned or quoted in a book that has nothing to do with Shakespeare. And I'm going to let you know for next Shaketember how many times I have seen references to Shakespeare in books that have nothing to do with Shakespeare. So if you want to do that, that could be your personal challenge too. Just take notice of how many times Shakespeare comes up where he is not really invited. All of this to say that, where was I? I was in the middle of a slide, so I did all this work and I was very preoccupied. And at first I read like these novels, these romances, but then I did not want to read one more romance because I was kind of sick of it and nothing else could really grab my attention because these little romances, they're kind of easy to read. I don't want to be a snob, but the fact is that these are much easier to read than this, for example, or some other books. So for a while, I simply just did not read. I watched YouTube videos and it tended not to be booktube. I just watched something else and I played Candy Crush and I don't know. I just could not concentrate. In the past week, it sort of came back. My mojo, reading mojo kind of came back, but I think I could lose it again quite easily. I'm still living on concrete floors, so I have removed the laminate floorings myself, and now I'm living on a concrete slab that is all cracked, and that worries me. And yeah, I'm expecting people to help me, and there's going to be work done in my apartment, and that's going to cause disturbances. To add to that, at work we are in a period of transition. Not that jobs will be lost as far as I know, but it's the way we work is going to change. It's going to be gradual. I think there's going to be change in the management structure. It's going to take about until next summer, but by next summer I think several changes will have happened. And there's also other people around me who are going through changes that are going to ask me to be there, and that are going to stress me out. So I don't know how my reading will go in the upcoming months, in the next probably 6 months. I'm going to give myself a long time, probably 6 months, perhaps a bit more. Could be all the way until next summer. I have no idea if I will be able to read as much as usual, if I will read the same things, or if I'm just going to be able to read romances or perhaps mysteries or things that are quite easy to get into, or if I'm going to still be able to read nonfiction or other more demanding books. As I said, I've sort of fell back on my feet. I'm back to my reading habits for the past week or so. I've been reading as usual. I have less difficulty concentrating, so I think the worst of it is gone. But I don't know how many videos I'm going to make. Will I be able to make a video a week? Perhaps I will be able to make one video per week, but perhaps I will not necessarily be able to talk about new books that I've read. Perhaps I'm going to have to talk about books that I've read previously. Perhaps I'm going to have to do to do tags that talk about books that I read before I was on BookTube. I don't know. I'll manage. I'll figure it out. But anyway, so that's the situation. Nothing is resolved. I'm reading a bit more, but for a good 2 weeks in September, I read nothing. And now I'm reading a bit more. But I don't know if it's going to go on like that, or if I'm just going to lose my reading mojo when as soon as there is a bit of a hiccup in the renovation plans, and there tends to be a lot of hiccups in renovations. Anyway, so that's that. Thank you everyone for watching. Let me know what you did for Shaketember, what you've read. About Romeo and Juliet, do you agree with me that it could have been a comedy except for the last scene? You changed the last scene and it's a comedy, a Shakespearean comedy, which is not really funny, but a comedy nevertheless. So anyway, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!